Okay, so hello everybody. I'm Maria. I'm in charge of the marketing department here at StorageMate, and I want to welcome you all to our webinar, Enable Your End Users to Get Secure Web, Mobile, and Desktop Access to Azure Files, Amazon FSx, and other SMB file services. Our presenters today will be the wonderful Doug Soltest, Director of Product Solutions at SME, and the fantastic James Norman, Head of Engineering at SME. So hello to you both.
Hey, Mariana.
Hello.
Mariana.
And I'll just head it over to you, Doug and James.
Oh, okay. I thought we'd get the answers. Well, why don't I start off? The webinar today is about using FSx, Azure Files, and other cloud-based filers. And the main reason that we're looking at this, or we see a lot of customers looking at this, is the whole work from home. So SME is already specialists in work from home before the COVID outbreak. Certainly, there was already a push to have maybe 25 to 30% of the workplace working from home by 2021. Today that's obviously much higher, and obviously all of the new Gartner estimates are coming in, much larger. And so as a key component, this can be complicated because most of the filers that you use today are going to be set up to work in the office. So, when we talk about a filer, we're talking about network attached storage. Some people call it a SAN or a NAS. SAN is technically, block storage that you format with a file system. But it's when you go in the office and you've got your home drive, you've got your network shares. This is what you're using for your ingrained workflows already. You generally sit down at your Windows or your Mac, you log in, you're using like an AD or LDAP. When you go to this share, you see a share like marketing or finance or something like that, and you only have permissions to what you're allowed to work on. And it works great in the office. So everybody in the office has a gigabyte pipe or a 100 meg pipe, to the actual filer and to the network, and everything is speedy. This is the way it was designed to work. But this typical office setup is actually many years old. So, I've been in IT for over 20 years, and this is what we've been doing for probably the last 15 of them, of having a network attached storage, also having a rack. That rack has maybe VMware, it's running your AD, it's running, it could be Hyper-V, but it's running all of your surface, all of your applications, and it's serving up all of your files in the office. And the problem has become that now that everybody is moving to work from home, you start getting new problems. So some of these problems are going to be like VPN contention. So you have far more users, and that VPN, that firewall that you see in the picture here, just was not made to necessarily handle all of your staff working from home. It was probably made to handle some of your staff, remote workers, people when they're home sick, or maybe working at night. And so the challenges that we see today with the typical office setup is that number one, that VPN may not be able to handle all of the users. Number two, installing VPN for a lot of users is kind of complicated for IT. So you've got your power users, and then you have some of your normal users that maybe are not as computer savvy. They work in a department that has nothing to do with IT, but they still need access to their files. And so getting them all set up from home on their individual laptops, there's a cybersecurity and compliance aspect of this. So if I have my home laptop and I'm able to VPN in, what if I have a virus? How do you protect against that? This is usually a two-way communication. Not to mention that I'm actually now pulling the files to me with no type of audit trail, because this is really all meant to be run inside the office. And then kind of last but not least, you've got all of the infrastructure problems. So, your WAN connection, you might have a 100 megabyte WAN connection at the office, and that's great for when everybody is in the office. But again, we talked about, normally their desktops are connected with gigabit pipes and whatnot. This WAN connection isn't necessarily going to be powerful enough for everybody to work from home. There's no edge caching of files when you're using, these filers. And so if I am working from home and I'm pulling up a couple of Office documents and I'm working on them, and then I lose my connection and I haven't hit save recently, then I'm going to potentially lose that data because there's no edge caching of files. And then lastly, the IT team, they still have to go in the office. They have to do maintenance on this. They have to do, patches, upgrade. They have to replace failed disk. And, it's if you want to change out your NAS, it's a forklift upgrade. The whole thing is a capital expense. And so because of these reasons, we've seen more and more cloud-based file services becoming established as an alternative to the normal office-based solution. So, the primary drivers for today's webinar are going to be the Amazon FSx and Azure Files, which are very new. I'll talk about that in another slide or two. And of course, there are some other ones out there, such as Nasuni UniFS technology that's more established in the market and may have more sophistication and functionality, things like snapshotting or global locking and whatnot. So one of the reasons we see people moving to things like FSx, Azure Files, Nasuni is that it's a OpEx expense rather than a CapEx expense. And so you're paying for what you need. It's built in the cloud. You can provision one of these file-based solutions in minutes. There's absolutely no maintenance to it. These clouds in general are huge, and so you have unlimited bandwidth, and you can easily grow this capacity as you need. And so it offers a really strong alternative to having your NAS in the office. And so what does this generally look like? Well, the customers that we have that have moved to the cloud, and there were a bunch before the whole COVID outbreak over the last 6 months, and it seems like it's accelerating today. But you still have an office, but in the office, you're now moving all of those VMs and all of the storage into something like Amazon. So you've got the symbol there for EC2. EC2 is just how they're running their VMs or instances. In other clouds like Azure, they're just calling them VMs. You have something like FSx, and they give you an entire suite of web services. And that way, no matter where your users are, if they're home or in the office, they are connecting in and they're using that as their infrastructure. So now your IT team could downsize the office. Maybe management is looking to have smaller offices in the future with less people coming into work as things move forward. But there are challenges to moving everything up to the cloud. So the first one is that pulling the data out of the cloud can be expensive. So they generally let you put the data in free, and so the reason that you're going to move all of your stuff to the cloud is because keeping all that data, there's this theory of data gravity, keeping everything together is going to be faster, is going to cost you less. And so generally we see people spinning up terminal servers or VDI or Citrix in this cloud as well. And the reason you're going to do that is you have legacy applications that regardless are going to require CIFS SMB access. If you didn't have those legacy applications, then you'd probably put everything into Amazon S3 or into Azure Blob. But because of these legacy applications that require a type of storage like CIFS, SMB, even NFS in some cases, you're going to have probably two types of storage in this cloud. The archive storage like the S3, and you're going to have the CIFS SMB. When you're working with the user permissions, the CIFS SMB today has the AD authentication, and you can put your normal permissions on there, but that's relatively new. So for example, just June 11th of this year, did Azure Files add AD authentication and those NTFS ACLs to the Azure Files. And so up until now, if you were to spin up or up until June 11th, if you were to spin up a Azure Files, you don't have your normal type of permissioning system that the admin is used to setting up. It's not integrated with your AD. And obviously permissioning is a very complicated thing, and it's very important. Likewise, if we look at FSx, even though they launched back in 2018, and I should note that both Azure Files and FSx have been around for years, but it's only this year that FSx added storage scaling. And so, if you go back 2 or 3 of my slides about challenges of working in the office, one of the challenges is, well, what do I do with my NAS when I have to scale it up? If it's more than 3 or 4 years old, I probably have to do a forklift upgrade depending on the vendor that you've selected. And if it's newer, then I have to buy an entire tray of storage, and that's a capital expenditure. And so I think that really we're talking about 2020 as being the year where some of these services like FSX and Azure File have actually come up to speed with what you would get in the office. And so ultimately what I want to do is I want to be able to use a solution that either gives my employees remote access from their homes in their environment, whether that's accessing into their typical traditional office setup, or I want to help them move all this data up to a major cloud, and again, still give them that access, give them some sort of edge caching. And so in order to do that, we're going to introduce the Enterprise File Fabric. And so James, at this point, I'd like to introduce you. James is our head of engineering. And James, why don't you take it away with how the Enterprise File Fabric can solve some of these issues.
Sure, thank you, Doug, for that excellent introduction. So as Doug mentioned, we're here to really show you how the Enterprise File Fabric can really help you leverage some of those cloud-based storage platforms. And for those of you that are new to Storage Made Easy, our product is called the Enterprise File Fabric. And as it describes here, we provide a secure multi-cloud data management solution. And our multi-cloud data management solution is able to connect into your organization's different storage platforms that you have, whether they be FSX or Azure Files or Nasuni or some potentially on-premise storage platforms. We can connect into your existing storage platforms, again, whether they're block or object, it doesn't matter, index that data, make that storage platform more productive, more safe, and more secure. We can bring all of your data into a single pane of glass. Just back one, well, stay on that slide if you don't mind, Doug, for a second.
Sorry.
That's fine. We can enable that single pane of glass view for your storage, providing that management layer over the top, giving you compliance controls, security controls, auditing controls, cybersecurity and ransomware protections, and also, key in this time, really helping to boost the productivity and the collaboration amongst our workforce. What's also really important here as well is that the file fabric is completely non-proprietary. So anything that you do through the file fabric is exactly as you would see on the storage, whether you're making changes to files, whether you're adding files, removing, whatever you take through the file fabric is exactly what it's going to be on the storage. We are not locking you in, so you can leave at any point. Not that we ever want you to. Next slide, please, Doug. Thank you. So at a sort of a 10,000 foot view, this is essentially what our solution looks like from an architectural point of view. The solution is purely virtual. It can deploy into many different hypervisors of choice, whether those are hypervisors in the public cloud like AWS EC2 or Azure or Google Cloud or IBM Cloud, or whether those are maybe typical more on-premise type hypervisor solutions like VMware or Hyper-V. We're able to deploy the Enterprise File Fabric wherever you need it to be. We then layer our core piece of over 60 different storage connectors. And so we can speak to, CIFS, SMB, file system type solutions like Amazon FSX, Azure Files, or Nasuni or other storage platforms. Or we can connect to the object storage platforms we mentioned, S3-based, blob-based, OpenStack-based, for example, or even consumer type storage platforms like Dropbox, OneDrive, and Google Drive. That is the core of our product. Everything else we provide is then built as layers on top of this. And we break those down into sort of three categories around security and compliance, productivity, and collaboration. From a security and compliance point of view, we can help to have a consistent policy engine. So you can define a consistent set of policies across your storage platforms. We've got permissions integration. Going back to Doug was talking about integrating our Active Directory into our FSX or into our Azure Files. We can integrate with those existing platforms so you're not duplicating permissions in other systems. There's auditing, alerting, encryption, compliance health checks to make sure that if you're operating within Europe, perhaps you're storing the data in the right place. You've got different PII and PHI alerts based on the data you're storing, where it's being stored, for example, whether it may be contravenes, say, GDPR or HIPAA, for example. There's, of course, the ransomware and the DLP protections falling under the security and compliance umbrella. Moving over to sort of productivity for our end users, we've got really easy document editing, multi-device access. So whether they want a mobile, a desktop interface, or a web interface, we're there wherever the users need us. Previewing, workflows, bookmarks, metadata extraction from files. We're there to try and help drive the productivity within our user base, and extending that through to collaboration as well, giving users consistent and easy ways and secure ways to collaborate with one another, whether we're talking in the context of inter-team collaboration, whether we're talking across team collaboration, or whether we're even talking collaboration with external parties as well. We can provide that collaboration layer on top of the existing storage platforms that you have. That also extends out into collaboration tools that our users are using today, like Microsoft Teams or like Slack, for example, or other collaboration tools that your organization may deploy. This all sits on top, again, of our seamless access layer. We're there wherever the users need us to be. That's the key part. So if they want to use a Mac drive or a Windows drive, whether they want to use a web interface, whether they want to use their mobile device on iOS or Android, for example, we are providing the access there. And that is all protected by the single sign-on layer as well, making sure that users can sign in with a consistent set of policies, signing in from their Active Directory or their SAML-based identity management system, so that they can access their files using one set of credentials. Again, we don't want to create another silo of accounts on another system. Next slide, please. That also, goes out to, detailing more really into the sort of the data protection and governance pieces. Key these days is, we've got these storage solutions. We want to make sure that people are able to use them, but they're also using them securely when they're in the office and also when they're working from home. And so, the solution can really help to expand the protection boundaries that we have around our different storage silos, protecting the employees and crucially protecting the important data that we have, giving real-time ransomware protection using our Forever File functionality, or whether we want to protect sensitive data, whether that's we're talking about encryption at rest, whether we're talking about PII or sensitive data discovery, including things like two-factor authentication and our FIPS certified encryption, and also going through to having a very detailed audit trail so we can concretely understand what is going on this system at any point in time, giving us logs about who's taken what actions across what platforms, across what tools. Everything is audit logged, and also integrations into other platforms are available there as well. And at this point, I'm going to hand over to Doug, who's going to also talk to us a little bit about how we keep metadata and other information in sync.
Sure. So, one of the things that we're often asked is, people get the idea that if they're using the product and they're using the product against a type of storage that is non-common, so that could be your Amazon S3, that could be an FTP server, that could be your Google Drive, that we've got these layers that you showed in your last slide where we can layer on permissions, collaboration, and whatnot. But one of the common things that comes up all the time is, well, if this is a bimodal system where I can work directly with the storage, and how are you going to handle the permissions? How are you going to handle if a end user right here writes data directly to my NetApp or my FSX or my Azure? How do you keep that up to date? How does the syncing work? And so what we have is we have a service called Jive that runs on the EFF. And so if a user, of course, writes data in through EFF, then that data, we know about it, is in our metadata. Of course, it gets written to FSX, and any user accessing that directly, say through a VDI, can see that data as well. So everything's up to date. Now, in the other case where a user is using the VDI, maybe that's an application that's running directly against the CIFS for the FSX. When they write the data, we don't know about it. And so what we have is this program called Jive, and it subscribes to what's called SMB Notify, and that's an event stream that comes out of most SMB2 or greater systems. And it's going to tell us, hey, a file event has occurred, and that file event is going to be that something was created, something was updated, modified, or something was deleted. It doesn't give us the deep detail of how big the file is or the user or anything like that. And so then what happens is that Jive service makes a call to the EFF to actually sync and pull that metadata directly from FSX. So if you create a new file, we get notification there was a new file. We tell that to the Enterprise File Fabric. The Enterprise File Fabric checks the underlying storage. And so this keeps you up to date so that if you have users working bimodally, which we want them to do, everything is just nice and seamless. And then the second question that comes up that I alluded to a little bit was, how do we synchronize permissions? Because generally, if I have a filer, whether that's, again, a Nasuni or FSX or Azure Files, and I've tied it into my AD, then it's the single source of truth for my permissions. So I've already gone through all of the shares, and I've already set up groups like finance or marketing and whatnot that have permission to certain documents. How does the Enterprise File Fabric deal with that? And so we have a multi-SIFS connector that when it walks and it indexes the existing metadata, and that indexing can not only pull in the file name and the size, but we can do what James alluded to, what's called deep content search. And that deep content search allows us to look inside the file, and that gives us the ability to do that HIPAA and PII data search. We can also, on a per directory level, pull what are the users and or groups that have permissions to this. And then once we pull that, we communicate with your AD or your LDAP server, and we find out who's in those groups. And so essentially, we allow your file system to be the single source of truth for all of the permissions. And so this means that if you have a new user that comes on board, you don't have to go update in multiple places. You add that user to your AD, you put them in the appropriate groups, and of course, the filer then learns about that, and Enterprise File Fabric learns about that as well. It gives you a single sign-on type of access. And then, of course, for anything that is not a normal filer, so again, if you got an FTP server, you've got a web dev server, you've got Google's storage, we can layer on our own artificial NTFS layer permissions to those type of services that don't have that. Maybe they have something more complicated like IAM, but as an admin, you understand how Windows NTFS permissions work, and you just want to layer that on everything across the board. And so with this, I think it's time for us to go into a demo. And so, James, you're going to get the demo environment set up real quickly, but there are a couple of things we're going to show you. In fact, what I'll do is I will end this presentation. I'll make James the presenter. While I do that, I'll just show you, we're going to be presenting today mostly in Amazon. And so in Amazon, we have a FSX set up. It's in the London region, which James is coming to us from. We also have AD set up in Amazon, and we have the EFF running as an instance, as well as a Windows VDI machine. So exactly what we kind of showed from that other picture. And then James, I believe you've also bonded Azure Files to this environment. Azure Files is kind of unique versus Amazon FSX in that Amazon FSX, you cannot assign a public IP to it. You cannot necessarily share it easily outside of your Amazon environment. But Microsoft, obviously, being kind of the inventor of SMB, has a way of doing that. And with these clouds being pretty powerful, we're able to get pretty low latency between the two clouds.
Okay, thank you, Doug.
All right.
So let's just switch over. I can take it, I think.
Perfect, perfect. I was just trying to figure that out.
So just want to check if you can see my Windows desktop.
I do.
Great, excellent. And just before we crack on with the demonstration, if anyone has any questions, either they've raised from the slide deck or as we go along now in the demonstration, please do drop them in the questions box in the session. We will deal with them as we go through if we can. Otherwise, we'll keep them till the end. Just get them in now as we go along, so that we have them there and we can answer them if they're relevant at the time. So as Doug was just mentioning just there, this is our file fabric deployment, and this one is running in London. What we're looking at right now is the web interface for our enterprise file fabric. And we're going to take you through a few things, and we've got just under half an hour before the end of this session. And hopefully by the end of the session, we will have most of this set up and ready to use for our FSX or our Azure Files and any other storage we may have as well. So let's crack on. So logging in first, we're going to log in first as our administrative user. And we're going to see some things that our normal users wouldn't see on the system as we log in as the admin in this case. And I'm going to start first actually at the dashboard, because the dashboard gives us a really good overview of the different storage platforms we have within our system. In this case, we can see from my system here that actually I've got a few different storage platforms here. I've got some FSX already added. I've got some Amazon S3 because in our organization we have some S3 storage as well, and we've also got some Azure Files. This may not be common for most organizations, but it helps to give you all the flavor of how the file fabric can support different data sources. If we wanted to add other storage platforms, maybe another FSX platform, another Azure Files, or maybe even if we wanted to add, say, an Asuni type storage platform, it's really easy here within the Enterprise File Fabric. You select the type of storage platform. Like we mentioned before, we support over 60, and we take you through a very easy wizard interface to add that storage platform into the file fabric. With our connections like we do with Asuni and FSX, we can also bind those into our Active Directory so that the file fabric can understand and work with the permissions on those storage platforms. So here with our storage already added, when we add the storage, the file fabric goes through a metadata index, and this is just purely looking to understand what we have on the storage platform. At that point, the file fabric is not pulling any files back into its core. We're not duplicating the files, we're not cloning the storage elsewhere. We're just merely bringing back a metadata model of that storage, and that is retained within the file fabric and kept up to date using techniques like our Jibe-based system as well for keeping updates in real time with users who are also using the storage directly. So we've got our storage here. The next step I always like to do is just show people through the how we're going to enable single sign-on. So single sign-on is enabled through our authentication systems. And as Doug pointed out, we already have our Active Directory here within AWS, and we've connected our Enterprise File Fabric into our Active Directory. It's very easy to configure, again, just a few options in here. Most of these are the defaults for users. And this will now enable our users to sign into the platform. They'll sign in with their Active Directory credentials. So things like password retention policies, inactivities, things like that of their accounts are all centrally governed within Active Directory. Again, this just doesn't become another pool of user accounts. So as we saw, we had 3 different storage platforms there on our dashboard. And when we come into our file manager, this is really where the meat of the product is. We can see our 3 different storage platforms here. And this is the single pane of glass view we were talking about when we were looking at the slides. So here we can see our FSX alongside our S3, alongside our Azure Files. So we can navigate into this storage platform, the FSX in this case. We can see the permissions, we can see the folders here. We've got finance, IT, marketing. Just to remind you, we are the administrator here, so we are seeing an elevated view. We can navigate into the directories, see the files that we've got. If we want to open previews for these, it's very easy to do so. We can do so here from the right-hand side. Have a look at this file. If we wanted to open this file for editing as well, it's really easy. We could perhaps open this in Microsoft Office Online in our web browser if we've got an Office 365 subscription, or we could potentially also just pull it straight down to our machine and open it in what we call our Cloud Edit functionality. Here we are opening now on my local machine. We could make changes. Yes,
One thing I see people have asked a couple of questions, so I think this is a good point to answer one of them. So the question that they asked is, what you're showing right now is working against Amazon FSX. How would this be different if you were a remote user and you were working against like a NetApp, an Isilon, some type of proprietary, legacy filer?
A very good question. So, we'll sort of touch on some of that as we go through the different experiences for the, different ways to access the platform. But, one of the real key benefits here, Doug, is that the speed actually will be massively improved, we believe, because, with a lot of these scenarios, unfortunately, protocols like SMB can be very chatty over the public internet. And they don't particularly yield well for at-home access, because the network speed is not what it was in the office, as you highlighted before. And so with the enterprise file fabric, the end clients connecting here, as we're navigating the file tree, or as I show you our network drives in a minute, these aren't using the SMB3 protocol for the end user to access. We're using internet optimized APIs in order to navigate and browse this directory structure. So it's a lot more speedier for the end users working from home. There's also a lot more going on behind the scenes here that's helping to speed up this delivery of this folder tree and working with these files. And of course, only things that need to come down to the machine are coming down, whereas maybe sometimes with SMB, calls are being made for every file on the file system.
Great, sorry to interrupt, but yeah, I just wanted to make sure people knew that, from our point of view, whether it's on premise or it's in the cloud, you're going to get the same experience. Your end users will be able to access their files in a single pane of glass. That can be this web interface or other interfaces that James is going to show you. It really just depends on where you are in the process. If you're 100% on-prem, then we have other webinars, and everything James is showing here still applies to you. You just deploy as a Hyper-V, a VMware, or a KVM image.
So, what we've seen here so far is we've seen our single pane of glass view. We've got our different storage platforms available here within our file fabric. We can manage them, we can work with them from here. But as a key, this is really going to be for our end users using this platform. So I'm really keen to show you how this is, what the experience is for our end users. So since we have integrated our Active Directory, in this case, into our file fabric, if we go and log in as my own personal account in this case, we are taken straight into, again, the same view, but this time we're going to see a slightly different view. The key thing here is that the file fabric is able to work with the permissions defined on the storage platforms. So in this case, we've actually only got access to the FSX. We've only got access to the Azure files. If we navigate, say, into the FSX, actually in our case, we've only got access to the IT folder within there, whereas there were a marketing folder and a finance folder alongside that too. So here with the file fabric, we're not having to clone the permissions elsewhere. These are just automatically detected from the storage's point of view. We can go into these folders, work with them just like we were in the other view, navigate into the different trees, look at some trailers. We could look at some different files that we've got in here, for example. And as an end user, this is a really neat solution. If we want to, say, drag a recording of a webinar we did last week straight into the file manager, really straightforward, drag and drop, and now this file is being moved. Actually, I've got a very good speed here. That's moving straight up onto my storage. That actually has gone up extremely quickly. That's a 450 megabyte file, and that went up in under 15 seconds, I would say. So that movement had actually been used by what we call our MStream technology, which is able to accelerate the transfer of these files, whether we're looking to accelerate file transfers between storage platforms, or from the desktop up to the storage, or maybe the storage down to the desktop. We can help to move those. And it's really key to point that this is just a Chrome browser at the moment. We could do this in Edge, we could do this in Firefox. The experience would be exactly the same, and there's no plugins here, which makes it even nicer for our end users. Again, as users work from home, like I mentioned before, the network speeds don't tend to be so good. So our MStream technology can actually help to maximize the bandwidth that they have. and utilize that pipe to get their files, to get their changes back up to the storage in a fast and efficient way. So, as we see with these files, we can navigate them. Again, we have the same experience with the Azure Files. We've got a very similar view here. We could take data between these different storage platforms if we wanted to. So we could take our webinar, we could copy it over to our IT folder. That copy happens in the background. That's being moved between the different storage platforms as we speak, making it really easy to move data, whether that data is being moved from, block storage to block storage, or block storage to object storage, or any other type of, say, public cloud type storage. It really doesn't matter. We make it so easy for the users to take these kind of actions. So, this is an example of the web interface. You've seen some of the basic things around viewing, editing these documents. I'd like to take you over to actually our desktop view, because a lot of the users who are familiar with FSX or with Nasuni or with, say, Azure Files or other SMB-based services, they're very used to having a network drive on their machine. And something I get asked a lot is, can they have a very similar experience, when using the File Fabric product? The answer to that is actually yes, they can. And like I mentioned at the start, we provide lots of tools for lots of different platforms. Whether you want to use a web interface, which a lot of people like to use these days, or whether you want to have a desktop-driven experience, whether you want a network drive or an offline sync client, or whether you would like a sort of an Explorer type application, or whether you want a mobile device access, we're there to provide the access across all the platforms where we see our users working with their assets. So what I'm going to focus on now is to actually have a look at how we can provide, say, a network drive interface to our storage. What the storage is behind the scenes doesn't actually matter to the File Fabric. We're focusing right now on our FSX and our Azure Files in this case, but it could equally be, say, some object storage as well. I've taken the liberty ahead of the demonstration just to sign in as my own personal user, just to save a little bit of time. And again, one of the neat things is we have what we call the cloud drive. Here on our machine, we see the S colon, which is just a network drive like any other network drive here on this system. And we see the S colon, and we see the files and the folders we have access to. We can navigate into the FSX folder, viewing the IT folder because I am the IT user. We can see the files I've recently just uploaded and copied. We can see the file we were also editing just a minute ago. We can open up folders, view the files, double click on them, and these will now open directly on our machine. This functions just like any other network drive. So, whether we're editing Word documents or manipulating Photoshop files, the experience is the same for our end users. So it's really seamless and works just like it would be in the office. The real difference is, though, like I mentioned before, just like we were using with the web interface and how snappy that was, the experience for our end users should actually be the same, whether they're really working in the office or whether they're working from home. So if we end up having this kind of hybrid workforce where we've got people in the office part-time and at home part-time, or we've got some people always at home, it's really good because a solution like the File Fabric can give them a consistent experience wherever they work from. They're not punished for working from home, for example. So, they're able to use our internet optimized network drives at a real benefit, so they can use it in the office and at home. And just like any other network drive, we can make changes directly from here. You might have seen a minute ago, it handles things like locking. So, we can prevent other users from making changes. We can, make changes to documents, click save, and now these go back up to the File Fabric. Really easy, just like that. And if we were to navigate to that folder here in our view, we would see that file recently updated. We can also, copy data into this. We can drag and drop folders in here if we want to, a selection of family photos, for example. We can drag and drop these into the drives, transferred up extremely quick. So,
hey, James, one thing I think we should definitely highlight here is that when you were just working on that Word file, one, you didn't have to open a VPN. You didn't have to do anything because at the end of the day, all of our traffic is going over HTTPS. So it's all encrypted, it's all secure. just like you said, the only thing you had to install was our Drive product. You didn't have any complication with the VPN. But then also, that data was cached locally. So I see that, for example, you've got the 46 meg PowerPoint that we had worked on. If I was working on that normally over a VPN, I'd open it, some of the data would come down, but it's a SIFS connection over my VPN. It's sending data, it's chatty, it's going back and forth. Whereas if you use the file fabric like you just showed, like with that Word document, when you open that, you pulled the entire thing down to the cache, and now you're working against it in your cache. And so when users don't have to worry about dropping their VPN or their internet going out or something like that, you have the data, you have it all there. And maybe it doesn't matter for that Word document that you opened that was 30 KB, but you better believe if you're working on a 200 meg PowerPoint for an important presentation and you're working on that for a few hours, it's going to be a much better experience. Or you brought up Photoshop or AutoCAD files, things like that. So.
Yeah, exactly, Doug. And it's that real performance benefit that we talk about that really makes this the killer piece for both the working from home and working in the office, because it can work just as well in both scenarios, which is great. And we've got lots of customers obviously in the last 6-7 months that are already in that mode of part-time in the office, part-time at home, and so they've already implemented the file fabric and getting the benefits of that already. So we can work with all the files we've got here from the desktop, just like we would in the web. We have other tools for the desktops as well, like sync clients and explorers. I won't be going into all of those today. We're more than happy to show you those afterwards. But of course, there's lots of things we can do from here as well. One of the things we aim to deliver is a consistent experience across the different platforms that we expose the storage to our users in. So whether they're using the web, whether they're using the network drive, whether they're using a mobile application, we try to make the same functionality available to them across the whole estate. And that extends out to things like, so for example, file sharing. One of the things that people always want to do is share files, whether we want to share files, between Doug and I into team, whether we want to share across team, or whether we want to share, actually outside of the organization. The file fabric has some really nice secure controls to share data. Typically with file sharing, we can resort to sort of shadow IT, fling it onto Dropbox or putting it into Google Drive, or just dropping it in an email. But there's lots of compliance and security considerations around that we really have to take care of. So if we're looking to share a file, let's take this Boomerang invoice here, for example. We provide similar functionality through the web. I'm not going to show you it everywhere, but for example, if we want to share this invoice with an external organization, we could say share. We could also share it by email. We have choices around our security choices around how long we want to share this file for. So we could say I want to share it for 1 day. We're going to put an expiration of 1 download. And as you notice here, our passwords are required by our organizational policies. We can share this file. And now the shared link has been shared to our clipboard. So I could drop this in an email to Doug. I could drop it in a Slack message or stick it into Microsoft Teams. We can drop it wherever we need to go. Let me
paste it. Yeah, it appended PDF to the beginning of it. Windows does that. There you go.
There we go. So we can share this file. We need to enter the password to access it. Of course, if we enter the incorrect password, we won't get it. We've downloaded it. We've now got access to the file. If we were to try and go back and access that link, or if I were to forward that link onto somebody else, they wouldn't be able to access it because we enforced the download limit on that file before. So, we've got some really neat ways of sharing. That also extends out to sharing folders as well. Let's say I want to share that folder of family photos. I could share this particular folder, with a group, or I could share it just by URL again. Again, need to put passwords in to share my folder because my policies require all of that. We can share that folder. And if we're looking to collaborate with an external organization, we could also set this up as a drop folder where we allow them to send us some files back. So we're enabling that two-way collaboration between our users. So, what we've seen so far is we've seen the desktop access. We've done some sharing, for example. We could do some more collaboration in here, like being able to, say, comment on these files. We could also look at some of the properties. We could look at the different versions of this file if we wanted to. So we can do all of those actions from here. What's really important is that, to recap where we've got to so far is we've enabled the FSX access for our users. They're only seeing the data they can access, and we're now giving them this more performant access into their storage. As an organization, though, what we need to be aware of, though, is the security and the compliance elements of that. And how are we going to protect that data? How do we put that ring around our users that are working from home? There's a couple of aspects to that. One of those aspects is related to sort of cybersecurity and ransomware. Depending on how the organization has implemented its ransomware protections and its cybersecurity controls, sometimes there can be a need for products like the Enterprise File Fabric to step in and provide functionality around, say, ransomware protection. The File Fabric has a feature called Forever File, and that helps to establish a ransomware safe copy of the data outside of the view of users, outside of the view of malicious users who might be trying to access our system, where the File Fabric can automatically archive files off onto a separate storage platform. It's your choice about where that storage platform resides. That could be something you may be keeping on premise, that could be something you're keeping in a separate cloud or in a bucket or some other place where you want to keep that archive copy. None of the users can see it, and it really serves actually a couple of purposes. The main purpose being obviously the ransomware protection, so that if your primary storage like your FSX or your Azure Files or even your on-premise SMB based services are unfortunately attacked by a sort of a ransomware threat, it gives you a place where you can go that actually it would be unaffected by any changes because that storage is actually not exposed to any of the users. It also gives you a business continuity factor as well. So if your primary storage is to go down, it can also offer and serve a read-only version of that storage, that archive storage, until the primary is able to come back online again.
And James, we also have a question in the chat about antivirus with this. So do you want to speak for because obviously antivirus can also be an important part of your ransomware mitigation strategy, and with users working from home with possibly unprotected home user laptops instead of corporate.
Yes, that's right, Doug, and that's an interesting point there. The along with the sort of the Forever File and the archiving of these files off onto a completely different data silo, the File Fabric has ways to protect the data that's actually being ingested into your storage platforms as well. So for example, we have integrations with, say, ClamAV that can actually provide virus scanning on upload. So if you want to make sure that any data getting into your platform is virus free before it touches your storage platform, then there's really easy ways to enable that within the Enterprise File Fabric. It is really just a push button to turn on. So so that sort of covers some of the protections around data getting into your platform and how we're managing those ransomware and those sort of attack vectors that we look at today. Some of the other elements, though, that we'd like to do to sort of put a ring around all of our users and protect them as they work from home is really kind of partly around what we call our policy engine. The policy engine gives the organization the complete control over how our users are going to use this platform. What kind of devices can they access from? What is the file sharing policy? Can they share files? Can they share folders? Must passwords be preset, for example? Must there be a download limit on files? Must they specify why they're making these shared files? Do we need to put in security controls like enforcing two-factor authentication for our users using one-time passwords, for example? Or do we want to encrypt files, or do we want to use our versioning and trash functionality, or our user interface options around which functionality is available for our end users? The policy engine is extremely rich in the number of choices and controls it gives the administrators, to really down to fine-grained details around how certain things can work. That, of course, also interlinks with what I call our sort of content intelligence and content discovery based modules. As we talk about malicious data getting into our platform, ransomware attacks, viruses, things like that. There's also another element of that related to compliance. And, we have to make sure that the data we are keeping in our platforms is compliant to our security and compliance obligations, depending on which region we're operating in. So if we're operating in Europe, maybe we have GDPR related concerns. Maybe we're operating in the US, maybe we want to be more worried about, say, HIPAA or the Californian Data Privacy Act. We have different regulations around the world. So with our content intelligence and content discovery modules, what we can do is we can help you to detect where you have data on your storage platforms that is actually going to maybe going to contravene you against some of those regulations you maybe have. So, for example, helping you to detect where you have, say, British passport numbers or American passport numbers across your estate. And of course, if you want to detect content that is very sensitive to your organization, you can easily add plugins that can scan the files against those rules that you define as well.
Hey, James. One of the things that is still lacking in FSX and Azure Files right now are their kind of audit events. So if you have a normal Windows filer, which is kind of what these are in the cloud, you do have an audit tab where you can go in, you can set up security, and you can see events. Now, those events aren't searchable. It's kind of a pain in the butt, but that's completely lacking in say FSX and Azure Files today. So if I'm a IT admin and I have these users working, against the share, how do I track who opened a file, who changed a file? Because inevitably, when you're an IT admin, you're going to get somebody saying, "Hey, somebody changed my file, somebody deleted something." How do we handle that, and can we help that situation where FSX and Azure Files missing it?
Yeah, so yeah, there's some really good events going on there, Doug. I mean, there's a couple of factors there to consider. The File Fabric has a full audit event log, which I'll just open up now. That records exactly what the File Fabric has been seeing going on the platform. So people logging in, people logging out, uploading files, sharing files, every single action that's taken through the File Fabric is recorded in here. Also, the beauty of how the File Fabric does its discovery of changes on the storage platform can also help to provide an audit log as well around what might be happening directly on the storage as well. So with incorporations around our jibe functionality, that is always listening to changes. That can help to also pool those logs into a single place, giving you again a view here within your audit event logs for how what is actually going on your storage platforms. As a compliance officer as well, Doug, it also gives you the ability to drill in more detail to exactly what's going on, drill in by user, drill in by the log message, the date ranges for which it happened. But also, if you're aggregating logs in different storage platforms as well, it's also handy to know that these logs can be pushed off onto other platforms as well, if needed too, like Splunk,
Sure.
for example.
So these are exportable. So if you don't have Splunk or you don't have an Elk server or something like that, you can even download this as a CSV or a Excel file, right?
Yeah, exactly. You can put it off in many different formats. You can pull them down on demand if you want into Excel, CSV. You can also archive them as well, and you can specify where you'd like them archived off onto as well into your storage platforms. So there's really neat ways to get copies of these if you for your bookkeeping.
So we're short on time, but we do have one or two questions, and I think one of them you could address right now. Somebody asked, what does that search button do? And so maybe you want to spend 1 minute just elaborating how our search is different, or why that's important. Obviously, if you're in Windows Explorer, there's a search in the top right, but everybody's had heartache with that because it basically just crawls the entire system. What does our search do? How is it better, or why would somebody use our search over trying to crawl the system?
Yeah, sure. So we have different ways of searching. We provide a search across all of your namespaces, whether that's FSX, Files, or S3, or any other platforms you have. We can provide this through the web, through here. So if we're looking for anything to do with our webinar, for example, we can easily pull those back. That's now searching across our different platforms to draw back those files where we have them. We also provide the same search actually through our desktop integrations, right-click options to search within our network drives or within our Explorer applications. And the same is also true across the mobile applications as well, Doug.
Sure, and I can see here, and I don't know if we enabled it for the webinar, but you search for the word webinar. What we're showing there on the right is that it says name, and so we were able to find the word webinar in the name of these files, but we also have a deep content search. So, if you search for, the word wasabi, because obviously I see a wasabi webinar there, you'd probably also find files that have the word wasabi within them. So this is a little bit more like a Google search, in that not only can you find the name of a file, but if you can't remember the name of a file, so let's say there's a file out there that has a certain line in it that you wrote in it, a doc file. So you wrote, do not distribute, and you want to search for that. You obviously didn't name the doc do not distribute. If you can't remember what you named it, where you put it, you're able to find that. You're able to find it quickly and efficiently. And that's really what you want from your end users. We want to move them into a new kind of platform where they're quick, they're efficient, and they're not, wasting any time if they're working from home. They don't have any type of, yep.
Okay, so we've tried to show, a good breadth of, coverage there. There's a lot more we could show, we're a little tight for time. So I think probably what we'll do is I'll hand back to Doug, and we'll then, I think just wrap up and take any extra questions people have.
Sure. So there are a couple of questions that I've held off on because they're in my next slide, but as long as we're here, why don't I just show real quick. One of the things that you talked about was security and compliance. And so, you guys are free out there to go ahead and scan our webinar.smb.io. That's what we're running right now in the Amazon cloud. But, out of the box, we're secure. We're doing things like firewalling. We're doing IP tables. We're doing SC Linux. Again, we have antivirus. We're using the latest ciphers. You get to control that, but you can scan us with something like SSL Labs. You can scan us with something else that does scoring for PCI, DSS compliance, HIPAA, NIS. And one of the reasons I bring this up is, this is your own personal appliance. It comes secure out of the box. It stays secure. And other platforms out there have intentionally made themselves a little bit less secure. So if you look at Dropbox, if you look at OneDrive from Live, one of the things that they're doing is they're trying to cater to every user. They're trying to make sure if you're running IE Explorer 9, that still works, even though you're not using the latest ciphers. And so, I'm not saying that those are, insecure, but if this is important data, and I'm about to get into a case study that we have, so let me just switch to that. A case study that we have with a major hospital on the East Coast, they have, hundreds of users, and security is their utmost concern. And so they need the HIPAA protection. They can't, reduce any of their ciphers. They need to make sure that this data is not crackable. And so we had a couple of questions around, do we have any case studies? And so we absolutely do. We have end users submitting their genetic data in the form of blood, I believe. That blood gets then set up in a lab. It gets analyzed. It's being analyzed in an Amazon or an Azure cloud. That's writing directly to the CIF share, because those applications only know how to speak CIFs. But then, their users in the office are using the cloud drive to access the result sets and then share those out with the end users. So, if you got a test and you want to know, do you have COVID, or do you have some type of genetic abnormality or something like that? These are very big files. And so the PII is important here. The protections are important. Who's accessed the data is important. The bimodal access into something like FSX is critical. And so they selected us because there's no other platform out there that is doing, all this. In addition, when this data is, after it's distributed, they're moving it into a cheaper tier of storage from their FSX, which I think is like, we worked with them, is like 30 plus terabytes of data that they migrated in. But then they have petabytes of data that are, archival, and they're sitting in S3. And again, our single pane of glass gives access into all of that. So I hope that helps for the person that asked, do we have any case studies? Another one was, how big can we scale? Again, we have accounts right now that are hundreds or thousands of users. In fact, we have our own SaaS platform that has, I think, just in the US, over 100,000 users, same in the EU. Somebody else asked the Forever file, are the licensing fees for that? And James and I are on the tech side, not in sales. So I would recommend that you shoot an email over or you contact us at sales.storagemadeeasy.com, and you'll be able to get pricing on the solution, whether that's on-prem or running in the cloud. We even have an IaaS solution where we deploy it and manage it for you. But yeah, they'll be able to answer any of your sales related questions. I'm looking through any other questions. Let's see, antivirus we talked about, search.
Yeah, I think we've covered all of the questions there, Doug, which is good. Okay, thank you, Doug.
All right,
and
thank you.
I'm sure that the recording will be made available, hopefully soon. It'll be available on our YouTube channel. And I'd just like to thank everybody for coming and listening to us. Thank you very much.
Thank you all.